The Thompson family had always loved traveling. From the pristine beaches of the Caribbean to the bustling cities of Europe, their vacations were filled with laughter, luxury, and carefully curated memories for social media. But this trip to Morocco was different. This was meant to be special, a dream getaway that Michael Thompson, 42, had planned as a grand surprise for his wife, Vanessa, on her 38th birthday. Michael, a successful real estate developer in Kingston, had spared no expense. He booked a 2-week stay in an exclusive riad in Marrakesh, complete with private guided tours, luxury shopping experiences, and a desert safari. Their 2 children, Jason, 14, and Brianna, 10, were just as excited. They had heard stories of Morocco's colorful markets, camel rides through the Sahara, and palaces that looked like something out of a fairy tale. For Vanessa, a social media influencer with over 200,000 Instagram followers, this was more than just a vacation. It was content gold. She envisioned glamorous photos in front of the iconic blue walls of Chefchaouen, candlelit dinners under the stars, and luxurious spa days at a traditional hammam. Yet, beneath the picture-perfect smiles, cracks were beginning to show in their marriage. To outsiders, Michael and Vanessa seemed to have it all: wealth, status, and a beautiful family. But behind closed doors, their relationship had been unraveling for months. Rumors of Michael's infidelity had been swirling in their social circles, and Vanessa, though she never confronted him outright, had her suspicions. Lately, Michael had been distant, spending more time on his phone and taking mysterious business trips. Vanessa, in turn, had buried herself in her influencer lifestyle, finding solace in the validation of strangers online. This trip was supposed to be their fresh start. Michael saw it as a way to prove his love, while Vanessa hoped to recapture the spark they once had. But neither of them realized that Morocco would be the beginning of the end. The moment they landed in Marrakesh, they were swept away by the exotic charm of the city. The air was rich with the scent of spices, the call to prayer echoed in the distance, and the streets bustled with merchants selling everything from hand-woven carpets to fragrant mint tea. Their riad was breathtaking, an oasis hidden behind high walls, with intricate mosaic floors, a courtyard with a serene fountain, and a rooftop terrace offering panoramic views of the Medina. Vanessa wasted no time setting up her tripod for the perfect arrival shot. She posed in a flowing white dress, captioning her Instagram post, "Marrakesh magic sparkles, can't wait to explore this beautiful city with my loves. #family goals, #luxury travel." Michael, however, seemed distracted. As Vanessa busied herself with social media, he stepped away to take a phone call. His expression was tense, his voice hushed. Jason and Brianna, oblivious to their parents' strained dynamic, eagerly explored their new surroundings. For them, this was an adventure, a chance to experience a new culture, try new foods, and create unforgettable memories. That night, they dined at a lavish rooftop restaurant overlooking the bustling Jima El Fna Square. They feasted on fragrant tagines, fresh-baked bread, and sweet Moroccan pastries. To onlookers, they were the picture of a happy family. But beneath the golden glow of lanterns and the melodic hum of traditional Moroccan music, Vanessa's mind was elsewhere. She noticed how Michael kept checking his phone, smiling at messages she couldn't see. Something wasn't right. And soon, she would discover the truth. A truth that would turn their dream vacation into a living nightmare. The next few days in Morocco were a whirlwind of sightseeing, shopping, and extravagant dining. Vanessa made sure to capture every moment, posing in the colorful souks, sipping mint tea on a rooftop, and snapping selfies in front of the Grand Koutoubia Mosque. To her followers, the Thompson family was living a dream. But in reality, Vanessa felt a growing distance between her and Michael. She had hoped that this trip would bring them closer, but instead, he seemed more detached than ever. He was always on his phone, stepping away to take calls and typing out messages with an intensity that made her stomach churn. One evening, as they lounged by the courtyard fountain in their riad, Michael excused himself to take care of some business. Vanessa watched as he disappeared into their suite, phone pressed to his ear. A familiar unease settled over her. For months, she had ignored the signs. His late nights, the hushed conversations, the vague explanations about his whereabouts. But something about his behavior on this trip made her certain. Michael was hiding something. Later that night, as Michael slept beside her, Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen dimly glowing with a notification. She hesitated. She had never snooped through his phone before, but something inside her snapped. With trembling fingers, she reached for it and unlocked the screen using his thumb while he slept. What she saw made her blood run cold. A message from a woman named Sophia read, "I miss you. When can we meet? You promised you'd make time for me in Morocco." Vanessa's breath hitched. He brought her here. Scrolling through their conversation, she uncovered months' worth of texts. Intimate exchanges, photos, hotel bookings. Sophia wasn't just an affair. She was here in Morocco with them. A sickening realization hit Vanessa like a wave. The hushed phone calls, the constant texting, the unexplained absences. Michael had planned this trip not just as a family vacation but as a chance to be with his mistress. Her hands clenched into fists, the phone shaking in her grip. How long had he been lying to her? How many times had she looked into his eyes, believing his empty words? Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to cry. Instead, anger rose within her, a storm brewing in her chest. This wasn't just betrayal. This was humiliation, and she would not let it go unanswered. Vanessa placed the phone back on the nightstand and lay still, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She imagined confronting Michael, screaming at him, exposing his lies in front of their children. But then a darker thought crept in. This betrayal deserved more than just words. She closed her eyes, her breathing slow and steady. Tomorrow she would make him pay. Vanessa barely slept that night. As Michael lay beside her, oblivious to the storm raging within her, she replayed everything in her mind. Every lie, every excuse, every moment she had wasted loving a man who had betrayed her so cruelly. By morning, she had made her decision. She wouldn't cause a scene. Not yet. Instead, she would act as if nothing had happened. She would smile, laugh, and play the part of the devoted wife. But beneath the surface, she would be planning her next move. At breakfast, Vanessa sipped her coffee with a forced smile as Michael scrolled through his phone. He had no idea that she knew. "Excited for today, babe?" she asked, her voice light, almost cheerful. Michael looked up, surprised. Yeah. What do you have in mind?" Vanessa had already crafted the perfect plan. "I was thinking we should do something different, something adventurous. A hike in the Atlas Mountains," she suggested. Michael hesitated. "A hike? You sure?" She nodded, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "It'll be fun. Just you and me. Some alone time." He smiled, seeming to buy into her act. "All right, sounds good." Vanessa hid her satisfaction. She had just lured him into his own trap. By the afternoon, they had left the bustling streets of Marrakesh behind, driving toward the Atlas Mountains. Their children stayed behind at the riad with a babysitter, believing their parents were off on a romantic excursion. The mountain air was crisp, the winding trails offering breathtaking views of the valleys below. But Vanessa wasn't admiring the scenery. She was watching Michael. He walked ahead of her, his back turned, completely unaware of the danger. Her mind raced. Would she push him over the edge? Would she use the pocket knife hidden in her bag? How would she do it? They reached a secluded viewpoint, a perfect spot where no one could hear them. Vanessa knew this was her moment. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "So, Michael," she said, her voice suddenly cold. "When were you going to tell me about Sophia?" Michael froze. His body went stiff, his breath catching in his throat. "Vanessa, I can explain," he started, but she laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. "Explain what?" "That you brought your mistress on our family vacation." She stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists. "That while I was planning this trip to save our marriage, you were sneaking off to be with her?" Michael's eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape. "It's not what you think." "Stop lying," she snapped, her voice echoing through the mountains. Before he could respond, Vanessa reached into her bag and pulled out the pocket knife she had bought in the Marrakesh markets. Michael's eyes widened in horror. "Vanessa, don't." But it was too late. With a surge of fury, she lunged forward, the blade sinking into his chest. Michael staggered backward, gasping. His hands clutched at the wound, blood seeping through his shirt. Vanessa! Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. She stabbed him again and again. Michael collapsed onto the rocky ground, his body twitching before going still. His blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the earth. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa stood over him, breathing heavily, the knife still clutched in her shaking hands. She had done it. She had killed her husband. And now there was no turning back. Vanessa stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears. Michael's body lay crumpled at her feet, his once vibrant eyes now staring blankly at the Moroccan sky. His blood seeped into the earth, the deep red stark against the rocky terrain. Her hands trembled as she looked down at them, slick with his blood. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, the adrenaline of the moment still surging through her veins. The enormity of what she had just done threatened to crush her. I killed him. I actually killed him. But there was no time for shock. No time for regret. She had to act fast. Vanessa forced herself to think logically. There was no way she could carry Michael's body down the mountain alone. If she left him here, it wouldn't be long before someone found him. A hiker. A ranger. And when they did, she would be the first suspect. Her mind raced through her options. An accident. It has to look like an accident. She grabbed his limp arms and began dragging him toward the edge of the cliff. The weight of his body made it difficult, and she gritted her teeth, muscles burning with effort. Michael had been strong in life, but in death, he felt like an anchor dragging her down. With one final push, she rolled his body over the edge. She watched as he tumbled down the rocky slope, his limbs flailing unnaturally before his body landed with a sickening thud on the jagged rocks below. He lay still, blood pooling around him. To anyone who found him, it would look like he had lost his footing and fallen. A tragic accident. Vanessa took a deep breath, wiping her bloody hands on the inside of her jacket. Her body was shaking, but she couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. She checked herself in her phone's camera. Her face was pale, but aside from that, there was no visible evidence of what she had done. The blood had only soaked her sleeves, which she could easily discard before returning to town. Taking another deep breath, she turned away from the cliff's edge and began making her way back down the mountain. She rehearsed the story in her head. Michael slipped. I tried to save him, but he lost his footing and fell. I screamed for help, but there was no one around. By the time I got to him, it was too late. It was believable. It was tragic. And most importantly, it would keep her out of prison. By the time she reached the base of the trail, she forced herself to cry. Real heaving sobs. She needed to sell this. The moment she spotted a local guide standing near a small visitor station, she ran toward him, tears streaming down her face. Please, my husband, he fell. He fell off the cliff. The man's eyes widened in shock, and within moments, people sprang into action. Calls were made. Authorities were dispatched. The nightmare had officially begun. But Vanessa? She was ready for the performance of her life. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and frantic voices. Moroccan authorities arrived quickly, a mix of local police and mountain rescue teams. Vanessa stood near the base of the trail, sobbing into her hands, playing the part of the devastated wife. They asked her the same questions over and over. What happened? When was the last time you saw your husband alive? Did he say anything before he fell? She stuck to her story. We were hiking together. He wanted to take a photo near the edge, but he slipped. I tried to grab him, but... She broke into fresh tears, shaking her head. He just fell. The officers exchanged glances. One of them, a middle-aged investigator with sharp eyes, nodded. We will need to confirm the details, madam. Within an hour, rescue workers reached Michael's body. From a distance, Vanessa watched as they maneuvered his lifeless form onto a stretcher, their voices low and serious. A few of them cast glances up toward the cliffside, pointing at the rocks where he had supposedly fallen. Vanessa clenched her fists at her sides. Stay calm. Stay in control. At the police station in Marrakesh, Vanessa gave an official statement. She repeated her story with precision, adding just enough emotional distress to make it believable. The lead investigator, Captain Idris Boukhaled, listened carefully, nodding as he took notes. He was a tall, imposing man with dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. "We will review the scene and perform an autopsy," he said after she finished speaking. His voice was polite, but there was something unsettling about the way he studied her. Vanessa forced herself to look away, gripping a tissue in her hands. "I understand," she whispered, but inside, she was screaming. An autopsy? She had stabbed Michael multiple times. If they examined his body too closely, they'd realize he hadn't just fallen. He had been murdered. Vanessa returned to the Riad that evening, where her children were waiting for her. She wrapped them in tight hugs, sobbing as she told them their father had suffered a terrible accident. The babysitter watched on, her face stricken with shock. The next morning, she received a call. Michael's autopsy had begun. The police would have updates soon. Vanessa's stomach twisted in knots. She needed to prepare for what came next. If they found out the truth, her dream vacation would turn into a nightmare. Vanessa barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Michael's lifeless body sprawled on the jagged rocks, his blood staining the earth. The weight of what she had done pressed against her chest like a boulder. She had planned everything, but had she planned enough? Morning came too quickly. As she sat in the Riad's courtyard, sipping a cup of mint tea with shaky hands, her phone rang. The police. Her heart hammered as she answered. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson. This is Captain Boukhaled. We need you to come down to the station. There are some concerns regarding your husband's death." Vanessa's grip tightened on the phone. "Concerns?" A pause. "Please come in as soon as possible." Her stomach dropped. "They know." At the police station, Captain Boukhaled greeted her with the same unreadable expression. He motioned for her to sit in the interrogation room. The air was thick with tension. "The medical examiner completed Mr. Thompson's autopsy," he began, flipping through a file. "And there are some inconsistencies with your statement." Vanessa forced a look of confusion. I don't understand. I told you everything." Captain Boukhaled leaned forward. "You said your husband fell from the cliff, but the autopsy revealed multiple deep stab wounds. He was already dead before he hit the ground." A chill ran through Vanessa's body. No. We also found something else," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "Traces of blood near the original hiking trail, as if someone had been injured before the fall." Vanessa swallowed hard. There must be a mistake. Maybe he fell onto something sharp. The captain studied her, his gaze unwavering. "Mrs. Thompson, you were the only one with your husband when he died. And now we have evidence that suggests his death was not an accident. Do you have anything else you'd like to tell us?" Vanessa's mind spun. "They don't have direct proof." "Not yet." She shook her head, letting her voice waver. "I loved my husband. Why would I hurt him?" Captain Boukhaled exhaled slowly, closing the file. "We're keeping your passport for now. You're not under arrest, but you're not free to leave Morocco either." Vanessa's blood ran cold. She had come here for a dream vacation. Now she was trapped in a foreign country, under suspicion of murder. Vanessa walked out of the police station feeling like the walls were closing in on her. The warm Moroccan sun burned against her skin, but she was ice cold inside. They knew. They didn't have direct proof yet, but it was only a matter of time. The police had her passport, and without it, she was stuck in Morocco. She couldn't leave, couldn't escape, couldn't even take her children home. Panic threatened to take over, but she forced herself to breathe. Think, Vanessa, think. She had to get ahead of this. If she could just find a way to explain the stab wounds, maybe she could still walk away free. Back at the Riad, She pretended to be strong for the children, but inside, her mind raced. She needed a plan, an alternative story, a new suspect, anything. Then, an idea struck her. What if she wasn't the only one on that mountain? She could claim that Michael had been attacked before he fell. A mugger, a stranger, someone desperate enough to stab him and push him over the edge. It was risky, but it was her best shot. She pulled out her phone and opened Google. Recent crimes in Marrakesh, hikers attacked in Morocco, violent robberies Atlas Mountains. If she could find even one case similar to hers, she could use it to her advantage. The next day, she was called back to the station. This time, the questioning was more intense. "Mrs. Thompson, you didn't mention the stab wounds before?" Captain Khalid said, his voice calm but firm. "Why?" Vanessa feigned shock. I didn't know. I thought he just fell." The captain narrowed his eyes. "So you're saying you didn't see anything unusual before his fall?" She hesitated for half a second too long. "No. But now that I think about it, we did hear something in the trees. Maybe we weren't alone up there." Captain Khalid didn't react. "Interesting, because we checked the area thoroughly. No signs of struggle. No footprints other than yours and your husband's." Vanessa's stomach twisted. They weren't just suspicious of her. They were certain she did it. Her time was running out, and if she didn't find a way to escape soon, she'd be facing a murder trial in a foreign country. Vanessa's pulse pounded in her ears as she left the police station. She had tried to redirect suspicion, but Captain Khalid saw right through her. The walls were closing in. She needed a way out. Back at the Riad, she locked herself in the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her once perfect hair was a mess, dark circles hung under her eyes, and her skin was pale. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? "Because you didn't plan for this, Vanessa." She had been so focused on getting rid of Michael that she hadn't considered what would happen if she got caught. And now, without her passport, she was a prisoner in Morocco. She needed to get her passport back, or find another way to flee. Vanessa grabbed her phone and started searching. Fake passports in Marrakesh. Bribing officials in Morocco. How to escape a foreign country without a passport. The answers weren't promising. Morocco was strict with border control. Without her documents, leaving legally was impossible. But illegally, there were whispers of underground networks that smuggled people out, but it was dangerous. If she got caught, she wouldn't just be facing murder charges. She'd be looking at years in a Moroccan prison. And that wasn't an option. That evening, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, 2 officers stood outside. "Mrs. Thompson, we need you to come with us." Her throat went dry. "Why?" One of the officers exchanged a glance with the other. "New evidence has come to light." Vanessa's legs felt like they might give out beneath her. They had something. She thought she had time. She was wrong. As they led her toward the police car, one thought echoed in her mind. This is the beginning of the end. Vanessa sat in the cold interrogation room, her fingers locked together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Across from her, Captain Khalid flipped through a file, his expression unreadable. She wanted to ask what evidence they had found, but she knew better. Don't show fear. Don't give them anything. Finally, the captain looked up. "Mrs. Thompson, we analyzed your husband's wounds more closely," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The pattern of the stab wounds suggests he was attacked from the front, and the angle of the wounds indicates that the attacker was likely someone of similar height to him." Vanessa's heart hammered in her chest. Captain Khalid leaned forward. "Tell me, Mrs. Thompson, how does a man stab himself multiple times before falling off a cliff?" Vanessa swallowed hard. I don't know." He placed a stack of photographs in front of her. Crime scene photos. Bloodstains on the dirt near the edge of the cliff. A trail leading back to the hiking path. And then, a close-up of Michael's shirt, torn and soaked in blood. She felt like she might vomit. "The blood spatter suggests your husband was stabbed before he fell," Khalid continued, "which means this was not an accident. It was murder." Vanessa forced herself to stay calm. Are you accusing me? The captain didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed another piece of evidence on the table. It was a forensic report. Your husband's blood was found on the sleeve of your hiking jacket, Khalid said slowly. Would you like to explain how it got there? Vanessa felt the walls closing in. She had cleaned herself up. She had checked her clothes. She had been so careful. But they had found something. She was running out of lies. And running out of time. I tried to help him, Vanessa whispered, grasping at anything to save herself. When he fell, I reached for him, but it was too late. That's how the blood got there. Captain Khalid studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair, nodding slightly. You see, Mrs. Thompson, he said. That's an interesting story. But there's one problem. He slid another photograph across the table. It was surveillance footage. Vanessa and Michael leaving their riad the morning of the hike. And on her arm, in clear view, was her clean hiking jacket. No blood. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. Khalid tilted his head. The blood was already on your jacket before you returned from the hike. Which means your husband was already injured before he fell. Silence stretched between them. And then, for the first time since the nightmare began, Vanessa knew. They had her. Vanessa's world spun. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Captain Khalid didn't need more. He had enough. 2 officers entered the room. One pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Vanessa Thompson, Khalid said, his voice firm. You are under arrest for the murder of your husband, Michael Thompson. Cold metal snapped around her wrists. As they led her away, she felt the weight of her fate settle in. The dream vacation was over, and now her nightmare was just beginning. Vanessa sat in the small, dimly lit Moroccan jail cell, her hands trembling. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with the scent of sweat and despair. She had always thought she could talk her way out of anything. But now there was no escape. Through the bars, she saw Captain Khalid watching her. Your trial will come soon, he said. I suggest you start telling the truth. Vanessa looked away. She wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. But deep down, she knew. Her freedom was gone. Vanessa sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the cracked cement floor. Her children. Where were they now? Who was taking care of them? Tears burned her eyes as she imagined their frightened faces, waiting for her to come back. A guard approached. You have a visitor. Her heart leaped. Was it her children? But when she stepped into the visitation room, she froze. It wasn't them. It was a lawyer, and the look on his face told her everything. This wasn't going to end well. Vanessa sat across from the lawyer, her hands shaking. You're facing life in prison, he said bluntly. Morocco doesn't take murder lightly. Her throat tightened. There has to be a way out. The lawyer sighed. The evidence is overwhelming. Your best option is a confession. It might reduce your sentence. Confess? No, she couldn't. But deep down, she knew. There was no escape. The courtroom was silent as Vanessa stood before the judge. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. The prosecutor laid out the evidence. Michael's stab wounds, the blood on her jacket, the surveillance footage. She sat frozen, barely hearing the words. Then the judge spoke. How do you plead? Vanessa hesitated. Her fate depended on her next words. Days passed in a blur. Witnesses testified. Experts spoke. The jury watched her every move. Then the verdict came. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's voice echoed. Guilty. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. Her dream vacation had ended in a life sentence. The prison was nothing like she imagined. Dark, crowded, merciless. Days turned to weeks. The other inmates whispered about her. She killed her husband. She sat alone, staring at the cracked walls. This was her life now. No escape, no freedom, just endless time to regret.